Picture this. You are sitting at a small table near the window of a cafe you have loved for years. The light is coming in at that particular afternoon angle that makes everything feel a little golden, a little suspended in time. You have a cup of something warm in front of you. You are not waiting for anyone. You are not checking your phone. You are simply there in the way that a woman who knows herself is simply there, fully present, fully settled, filling the space around her with something that is difficult to name, but impossible to ignore. A man walks in. He is in his late 60s, silver at the temples, the kind of face that has seen enough of life to stop pretending about it. He orders his coffee, finds a seat, and then he looks at you, not a glance, a real look. The kind a person gives when something catches them off guard, when they encounter something they were not expecting and it stops them for just a moment. You don't notice immediately. You are reading, or looking out at the street, or simply existing in that rare and beautiful way that some women have learned to exist, without performing, without waiting, without shrinking. When you do look up, there is a moment, a still point. And in that moment, something passes between two people who understand, each in their own way, what it means to have lived. Here is what that man would tell you later, if you gave him the chance. He would not say you were the most beautiful woman in the room. He would not mention your hair or your clothes or even your smile, though he noticed all of those things. What he would say, what men over 65 say again and again when they speak honestly about attraction, about what actually draws them toward a woman at this stage of life, is something far more specific, far more surprising, and far more available to you than you might think. He would say, it was the way you were with yourself. And if you are not sure what that means yet, good. That is exactly what we are here to talk about. By the time this video ends, something will have shifted in the way you see yourself. Not because I am going to tell you how to be more attractive, or how to present yourself differently, or how to become something you are not. What I am going to give you today is something far more powerful than that. I am going to help you recognize something you already have, something that has been growing quietly inside you through every hard year, every loss, and every morning you got up and kept going when you didn't feel like it. Something that the women in your age group who are most magnetic, not just to men but to life itself, have learned to stop hiding. This is not about dating tips. It is not about strategy. It is not about understanding men, though you will understand something important about them by the end. This is about you, about the truth of who you are right now, at this particular point in your life, and why that truth, when you stop apologizing for it, when you stop dimming it, when you let it simply be visible, is the most compelling thing a woman can carry into any room. You deserve to hear this. You have earned the right to understand it. And once you do, I believe something in you is going to settle, quietly, firmly, the way something settles when it recognizes itself in a mirror for the first time. Let's begin. There is a word that comes up again and again when emotionally mature men over 65 are asked what draws them to a woman. The word is presence. Not beauty, though beauty matters to them. Not youth, which they know they themselves no longer possess. Not a particular personality type or lifestyle or set of interests. Presence, the way a woman inhabits herself. The degree to which she is actually there in her own life, in her own body, in her own truth. Unapologetically, without performance, without the constant low-level anxiety of wondering whether she is enough. What these men are describing, without always having the language for it, is a quality that psychologists call self-possession. And self-possession, truly understood, is one of the most quietly powerful states a human being can inhabit. It is not confidence in the way we usually mean that word, loud, performed, competitive. It is something older and calmer than that. It is the particular stillness of a woman who has been through enough to know who she is, who has stopped waiting for the world to confirm her worth, and who has, somewhere along the line, made her peace with the woman looking back at her from the mirror. This is what men over 65 find completely irresistible. And the extraordinary thing, the thing I want you to sit with, is that this quality is not something you have to acquire. It is something you have been building your entire life. The question is simply whether you are letting it show. Think about the women in your life, the ones who seem to draw people toward them without trying. They are not always the most conventionally beautiful. They are not always the most socially energetic, the most talkative, the most perfectly put together. But there is something about being in their company that feels different from being with other people. Something that makes you feel inexplicably more alive and more real. That is self-possession in action. That is a woman who has come home to herself, and whose homecoming is visible to everyone around her. Now think about the moments in your own life when you have felt that way, when you have felt settled inside yourself, clear about who you are, uninterested in performing or pleasing or managing how you appear. Those moments exist. They have happened to you. Maybe in your garden, or walking alone on a familiar path, or in the middle of a creative project, or in a conversation with a friend who truly knows you. In those moments, you were self-possessed. You were, in the truest sense, completely yourself. And the question this video is going to answer, piece by piece, layer by layer, is how to carry that quality not just in the private moments, but everywhere you go. We are going to look at 6 specific dimensions of self-possession, 6 ways it shows up, 6 reasons it is so deeply compelling to men who have lived enough to know what actually matters, and 6 ways you can recognize and reclaim it in your own life, not as a technique, not as a strategy, but as an honest reckoning with the extraordinary woman you have become. Here is the first thing you need to understand. Most women spend the first half of their lives learning to disappear in very specific ways. They learn to soften their opinions when the room might disagree. They learn to frame their needs as questions rather than statements. They learn to take up less space, physically, emotionally, conversationally, so that the people around them are not made uncomfortable. They learn to monitor the atmosphere of every room they enter and adjust themselves accordingly, endlessly, exhaustingly. This is not a character flaw. This is what the world asked of them, what school asked of them, what their families asked of them, what their romantic relationships asked of them, what the whole silent architecture of a particular kind of womanhood asked of them for decades. And then something happens. For some women, it comes gradually. Either way, a tide comes in. For others, it arrives like a window breaking. Sudden, clarifying, impossible to ignore. But at some point, often somewhere in their 60s, the performance becomes unbearable. The cost of disappearing finally outweighs the reward, and a woman begins, slowly, uncertainly, then with gathering momentum, to come back to herself. Picture the woman you might know who made that shift. Maybe she is a friend. Maybe she is you. In a moment you remember clearly. Something in her face changed. Something in the way she moved through a room changed. She started saying no without the paragraph of explanation. She started talking about what she actually thought rather than what she thought people wanted to hear. She stopped accommodating every request, stopped shrinking from every confrontation, stopped performing ease when she was not at ease. And something remarkable happened. People were drawn to her more, not less. Men noticed her in a different way. Other women leaned toward her. The room seemed to rearrange itself around her, without her doing anything at all except stopping, simply stopping the work of disappearing. This is the first dimension of self-possession, and it is foundational to everything else we are going to talk about today. The willingness to stop disappearing. The decision made quietly, without announcement, often without even fully understanding why, to simply be visible, to let your actual self take up its actual space. Why is this so compelling to men, particularly men over 65? Because these men have also been on a journey. They have lived enough to be exhausted by pretense, their own and everyone else's. They have had relationships where both people performed versions of themselves that were not quite true, and they know the particular loneliness that lives inside that kind of connection. What they want, what they genuinely hunger for at this stage of life, is something real, someone real, a woman who is actually present in her own life, who does not require him to manage her self-image, or prop up her confidence, or pretend that everything is fine when it is not. A woman who is complete enough in herself that being with her feels like being with someone rather than being needed by someone. This distinction matters more than almost anything else we will discuss today. There is an enormous difference between a woman who wants a relationship and a woman who needs one. Men over 65 can feel that difference within minutes of meeting someone, often within seconds. The need, the particular quality of emotional hunger that comes from a woman who has not yet found herself, registers as a kind of weight, a pressure, an implicit demand. It is not her fault. It is entirely understandable, but it is felt, and it changes everything about how a man responds. The woman who has stopped disappearing, who has come home to herself, who wants connection but does not need it to feel whole. That woman registers entirely differently. She is a presence, not a need. She is an invitation, not a demand. She is someone a man can choose freely, rather than someone he has to be careful around, or someone he has to manage or rescue or perform for. And that freedom, the freedom to simply be with her, is, for a man of this age, one of the most profound gifts another person can offer. You are not too old to offer this gift. In fact, you are arguably the most capable you have ever been of offering it, because the willingness to stop disappearing does not come from youth. It comes from experience. It comes from having lived enough to know that the approval you were chasing was never worth the cost of your authenticity. It comes from loss, the losses that broke you open and showed you what was real inside. It comes from time, your time, and that makes it yours in a way that no 20-year-old woman on earth can match. You did not disappear all those years. You were in training. And what you trained for, whether you knew it or not, is the most magnetic version of yourself you have ever been. Every single version of yourself you gave away. To a marriage that did not see you, to children who needed everything from you, to a career that demanded you fit a particular mold, to a decade or two of simply surviving, you can have back. Not as a loss recovered, but as a woman returned. More herself than she has ever been. More worthy of being truly known. More capable of being truly loved. Stop disappearing. You are too interesting for that now. If this is resonating with you, I want you to drop a comment below and tell me your experience. Your story matters, and it helps other women feel less alone. The second dimension of self-possession that men over 65 find completely irresistible is this: the way a woman carries her own story. Every woman of 60 or older has a story that would make a lesser person collapse. There are chapters of grief in there, chapters of betrayal, chapters of exhaustion so complete it redefined what she thought she was capable of enduring. There are moments she is not proud of, and years she would rather not revisit, and losses she has never fully spoken aloud to another living soul. And there is, threaded through all of it, an undeniable, irreducible, almost inconvenient strength. The strength of a woman who is still here, still upright, still choosing to be present to her own life. Now here is the question: how does she carry that story? This is where women diverge in ways that are deeply significant to how they are perceived and experienced by the people around them, including men. Some women carry their story as evidence of their damage. Every chapter is a wound they display, consciously or not, a proof of how much they have suffered, how badly they were treated, how much the world owes them. They lead with their pain, narrate themselves through their losses, and allow their history to define the ceiling of what they expect from the future. There is tremendous compassion owed to women in this place. The pain is real, but the way it is carried creates a particular atmosphere around them, heavy, contracted, defensive, that makes it very difficult for anything new to enter. Other women carry their story entirely differently. They carry it the way a traveler carries a pack, with awareness of its weight, with respect for what it contains, but without letting it determine where they are allowed to go. They do not pretend the hard chapters did not happen. They do not perform cheerfulness. They do not feel or claim a peace they have not actually made. But they have, somewhere along the line, arrived at a relationship with their own history that is neither denial nor captivity. They can tell you what they have been through without making you feel like you are responsible for it. They can acknowledge the losses without being defined by them. They can speak about pain with the quiet authority of someone who has processed it, not erased it, processed it, and come out the other side still capable of curiosity, still capable of warmth, still capable of wonder. This is the second quality, not a specific attitude or a scripted way of speaking. It is an actual internal relationship with your own past, one where you are neither running from it nor imprisoned by it. And men over 65 find this quality staggeringly beautiful because it is rare and because it speaks directly to something they, too, are navigating. Men of this age have their own stories, their own regrets, their own chapters of failure, their own losses that reshaped them in ways they are still understanding. When they encounter a woman who carries her history with that particular kind of dignity, they feel, often for the first time in a long time, that they are in the presence of someone who might actually understand them, not someone who needs to be protected from the hard parts of life, not someone who will recoil from his imperfect history or demand that he be only his best chapters, someone who has lived and who regards the living with something like respect for herself and, by extension, for him. There is a scene I want you to think about. Two women, both in their early 60s, both single after long relationships, both attending the same dinner party. One of them, when the conversation turns to relationships and past marriages, tightens almost imperceptibly. She tells a brief, careful story about her divorce, not dishonest, but guarded. She deflects with humor when the subject goes deep. She has not made peace with what happened, and it shows in the edges of everything she says. The other woman sits easily in the same conversation. She does not overshare. She does not perform wounds. But when she speaks about her past, there is a quality in her voice, calm, unhurried, self-aware, that signals to everyone at the table that she has sat with her own story long enough to befriend it. She is not defined by it. She is not ashamed of it. She is simply a woman who has lived a life of genuine complexity and has chosen to regard that complexity with something like affection. Guess which woman the man across the table cannot stop thinking about on the drive home. Here is what I want you to understand about your own story. You are not required to have resolved everything. You are not required to be fully healed in the clinical sense, to have worked through every wound in a therapist's office, to have arrived at some perfect state of acceptance about every hard thing that happened to you. What you are invited toward, what this particular quality requires, is simply an honest, ongoing relationship with your own experience. A willingness to look at what happened to you with clear eyes rather than averted ones. A willingness to acknowledge the parts that changed you, the parts that broke you, the parts that you are still carrying, without making them either invisible or all-defining. Your story is not a liability. It is not something to be managed or minimized or strategically disclosed. It is evidence, detailed, undeniable, hard-won evidence of your depth, of your capacity, of the extraordinary fact that you are still here, still open, still interested in what comes next. That evidence is attractive in the most primal sense of that word. It signals to a man who has also survived his own decades that you are someone worth knowing, not someone to be protected from the truth of things, someone who can stand in the truth of things and not break. You have been standing in hard truths your whole life. Start letting that show. The third dimension of self-possession is one that surprises people every time I name it, because it sounds almost too simple to carry the weight I am about to give it. Here it is: the ability to be genuinely interested in someone else without losing track of yourself. This sounds straightforward, but it is in practice one of the rarest and most powerful social gifts a human being can possess. And for women who have spent decades performing interest while actually managing their own anxiety, or performing interest while actually managing someone else's needs, or performing interest while quietly disappearing, it is something that has to be consciously reclaimed. True interest, genuine, unperforming, unmanaged curiosity about another person is felt immediately. It is one of the most primitive forms of human recognition. When someone is actually interested in you, when they are listening without waiting to speak, when they are asking questions because they genuinely want to know the answers rather than because it is their turn, when their attention is really on you and not on the performance of attentiveness. You feel it in your whole body. It is warming, it is rare, it stays with you. And here is what makes this so particular to self-possessed women. They can be genuinely, deeply, fully interested in another person without needing that interest returned, without monitoring whether he finds them interesting, without running a constant background program of am I enough? Am I too much? Does he like me? Should I say this? Should I ask that? The interest is clean, uncomplicated, real. It is the interest of a woman who is secure enough in herself that she can focus entirely outward without losing her footing. Think about what that feels like to be on the receiving end of. Think about the last time someone was truly, unhurriedly, completely interested in you, not in what you could do for them, not in the image they wanted to project by being associated with you, not in a transaction of any kind, but simply in you, in who you are, in what you think and feel and have experienced. Think about how rare that was. Think about how much it meant. A man over 65 who has a conversation with a woman like this, a woman who is genuinely curious about him, whose attention is not manipulative or performative or attached to any outcome, does not forget her. He cannot. Because what she gave him in that conversation is one of the most fundamentally human experiences available. The experience of being truly seen. And she gave it to him not because she needed something from him, but because she was secure enough in herself to be fully present with him. This is one of the places where the intersection of self-possession and attraction becomes almost mathematical. The woman who is genuinely interested without being anxious about whether she is interesting. That paradox is exactly what makes her interesting. The woman who gives her full, warm, unguarded attention without needing anything back. That generosity is exactly what makes a man want to give back to her. The woman who is not running an agenda, who is not managing the impression she makes. That freedom is exactly what makes him want to be near her again. I want to say something directly to you now because I think it matters. If you have ever sat across from a man you were attracted to and spent the entire conversation managing your presentation, monitoring your word choices, assessing his reactions, calculating whether you were saying too much or too little, wondering if you were laughing at the right moments. I want you to know that the exhaustion you felt afterward was not a personal failing. It was the cost of a habit that was taught to you, the habit of performing rather than being, the habit of managing rather than simply meeting. And I want you to know that this habit can be unlearned, not in a day, not by trying harder, not by following a script, but by coming back again and again to the simple question, what am I actually curious about right now? What do I genuinely want to know about this person? What is actually true for me in this moment? When you lead from genuine curiosity rather than managed performance, everything shifts. You stop being someone running a program. You become someone actually present. And actual presence in a world full of managed performances is electric. If this video is speaking to something you have lived through, share it with a woman in your life who needs to hear it today. You might change someone's entire week. The fourth dimension of self-possession is the one that is least talked about and perhaps the most profound. It is what I call emotional steadiness, and it is not what you might expect it to mean. Emotional steadiness is not the absence of feeling. It is not stoicism or flatness or the kind of controlled exterior that has nothing to do with authentic inner experience. It is not keeping yourself carefully managed so that nothing difficult comes out. In fact, a woman who has achieved that kind of false steadiness is not self-possessed at all. She is simply armored, and armor, however polished, communicates one thing to everyone who encounters it. I am not actually safe to be known. Real emotional steadiness is something different and something far more difficult to achieve. It is the capacity to feel the full range of your emotional life: grief, anger, joy, fear, love, longing, frustration, peace, without being at the mercy of any of it. It is the capacity to be moved without being swept away, to be affected without being destabilized, to have feelings without being defined by them or controlled by them, or requiring someone else to manage them for you. A woman with emotional steadiness can be brought to tears by something beautiful and not feel ashamed of it. She can be genuinely hurt by something that happened and speak about it clearly without either minimizing it or turning it into a crisis. She can be angry, actually angry, not the tight, anxious, not quite anger that has been carefully managed into socially acceptable form, and feel that anger in her body. And then, when the time is right, speak from it with clarity rather than combustion. She can be disappointed without collapsing. She can be delighted without performing delight. She can be present to whatever is actually happening inside her, and she can be present to it without losing the thread of who she is. This is, in the most precise sense, emotional maturity. And it is devastatingly attractive to men who have lived enough to understand what emotional immaturity costs, in themselves and in their relationships. Let me give you a scene. A man over 65 has been on many dates. He knows within the first 20 minutes of most of them whether the woman across from him is emotionally steady or not. Not because he is running a checklist, but because he has lived enough to feel it. He notices whether she can tolerate a moment of silence without filling it with noise. He notices what happens in her face when a mildly difficult topic comes up, whether she contracts, deflects, gets brittle, or stays simply and openly herself. He notices whether her warmth is genuine or performed, whether her laughter has real air in it or is slightly too careful to be real. He notices, above all, whether being with her feels easy or managed, whether he can simply be himself, or whether there is a faint but persistent sense that he must be careful. None of this is conscious evaluation. He is not sitting there with a clipboard. He is simply feeling the atmosphere the woman creates, the way you feel the atmosphere of any room you enter. And emotional steadiness creates a very particular atmosphere. It creates a sense of safety, not the safety of a house that never has any weather. but the safety of a house that can hold whatever weather comes. Warmth, groundedness, the deep, almost cellular reassurance that this person will not shatter if life brings difficult things. For a man who has been through divorce or illness or loss, or any of the 100 forms of difficulty that arrive by the time a person reaches their mid-60s, this quality is not a preference, it is a necessity. He knows with the particular wisdom of someone who has lived without it exactly what it costs to be in a relationship with someone who cannot hold their own emotional world. And he knows, with equal certainty, what it would feel like to be with someone who can. You have been developing emotional steadiness your entire life, often through the hardest possible means. Now, every time you got through something that you thought might break you and did not break. Every time you sat with a grief that felt bottomless and found, eventually, that you could breathe again. Every time you were afraid and moved forward anyway, not because the fear left, but because you understood viscerally that fear does not have to be the last word. Every time you chose, in the middle of your most difficult chapter, to stay present to your own life rather than disappear into avoidance or bitterness or numbness, you were building steadiness. You were becoming someone who can hold weather. That is not a small thing. That is one of the rarest and most valuable qualities a human being can possess. And the extraordinary irony is that the women who most reliably possess it are the women who have been through the most, the women who would not, on the surface, seem to be the most resourced or the most fortunate. Your difficulty has been your education, your loss has been your curriculum, and what you have learned, the particular, embodied, unshakable knowledge that you can survive and remain yourself, is more attractive than anything youth has to offer. Be steady, not because men find it attractive, but because you have earned that steadiness with your life. Let people feel the ground beneath your feet, because you have stood on it in the storm and it held. The fifth dimension of self-possession is the one that tends to make women laugh a little when I name it, because they recognize it immediately and have never thought of it as attractive. It is this, the willingness to have an actual opinion, not a polite opinion, not a diplomatically hedged, carefully qualified, what do you think first opinion. An actual opinion, a view of the world that is genuinely yours, that you can articulate without apology, that you are willing to maintain even when someone disagrees with it. The kind of opinion that reveals something true about how you see the world, what you value, what matters to you, what you find absurd, what you find beautiful, what you think is wrong with things, and what you believe could be better. Women of 60 and older were raised with remarkable consistency to manage their opinions in social situations, to sense the room and match it, and to offer views only when they were safe, when they already knew they would be agreed with, when the stakes were low enough that disagreement would not cost them anything important, to soften, qualify, couch, and frame their perspectives in ways that minimized the risk of conflict. This was not weakness, it was survival. It was intelligence applied to a world that often punished women for having the wrong opinion in the wrong room. But it has a cost, and the cost is this: it makes you invisible. Not dramatically invisible. You are still there, still present, still saying words, but you become, in a very specific way, indistinguishable from the wallpaper, because the wallpaper too is not going to disagree with you. A woman with an actual opinion is not the wallpaper. She is the unexpected piece of art that stops you in the middle of the room and makes you want to know who chose it and why. She is the conversation you were not planning to have but cannot get out of your head afterward. She is, to a man who has spent decades surrounded by social performance and managed agreement, a genuine revelation. Not because she is contrary, not because she argues for the sake of it, but because something real is coming from her, something true, something worth engaging with. Think about the conversations that have stayed with you, the ones that genuinely changed your thinking or made you see something differently or introduced you to a perspective that expanded your world in some small way. Those conversations had a particular quality. They were not safe. They were not entirely comfortable. They asked something of you, some willingness to actually think rather than simply agree. And the person who gave you those conversations was almost certainly someone with a genuine, unperforming point of view. This is what you offer when you are willing to have an actual opinion. You offer someone the experience of a real encounter. Not a pleasant chat, but a genuine meeting of minds. The kind of conversation that makes the drive home interesting and the memory of you alive in someone's mind for days. Men over 65 who are emotionally mature and intellectually alive are starving for this. They have sat through enough polite evenings, enough carefully managed social performances, enough conversations that went nowhere and cost nothing and left them exactly as they arrived. A woman who has something real to say, who can tell you what she actually thinks about a book or a political situation, or a choice someone made, or the way something in the world has changed, is not a challenge or a difficulty. She is a gift. She is the reason to come back. You have opinions. You have spent 60+ years accumulating them through experience, through observation, through reading and living and watching and surviving. Your opinions are not random. They are the distillate of a life. Let people hear them. Let your actual view of the world be visible. Disagree when you disagree. Hold your ground with warmth rather than stubbornness, but hold it. Let the particular slant of your vision, the way you specifically see things, be available to the people who are in the room with you. Because here is the truth about the women who are most magnetic at 60 and beyond. They know what they think. And they say it. Not aggressively, not competitively, not to win anything, but with the particular ease of a woman who has stopped needing to be agreed with in order to feel secure. She says what she thinks because she thinks it. And that simplicity, that clean, uncomplicated directness, is one of the most quietly extraordinary things a person can encounter. You have something to say. Start saying it. And if this is the first time you are watching The Heart Code, welcome. Hit that subscribe button and join this community of women who have chosen to understand themselves more deeply. The sixth and final dimension of self-possession, and perhaps the one that is most central to everything we have been building toward today, is what I want to call the quality of not needing to be chosen in order to feel chosen. This requires a little unpacking, so stay with me. Every woman has felt at some point in her life the particular vertigo of waiting to be chosen, waiting for a man to call, waiting for him to decide she was worth pursuing, waiting for him to love her the way she needed to be loved, waiting for his approval to confirm that she was, in fact, worth approving of. This is not a character flaw. This is the architecture of a romantic culture that has told women for generations that their value is a function of whether they have been selected. You are valuable if someone has chosen you. You are lovable if someone loves you. You are worth keeping if you have been kept. This is what the culture said, and the culture was wrong. Spectacularly, harmfully, demonstrably wrong. And you knew it was wrong on some level, even as you lived inside it. The women who have arrived at 60 and beyond and have done the work, the inner work, the quiet, unglamorous, sometimes agonizing work of deciding their own worth for themselves, have crossed a particular threshold. They no longer wait to be chosen in order to feel chosen. They have chosen themselves, and that That specific, embodied, lived in the bones, self-choosing, is the foundation of everything we have talked about today. And it is the quality that men over 65 with any degree of emotional maturity find, in the deepest and most lasting sense, completely irresistible. Let me show you why. When a woman's sense of her own value is contingent on whether a man chooses her, she enters every interaction with an invisible agenda, not because she is manipulative, but because she is afraid. She needs this to go well. She needs him to like her. She needs the conversation to end in a particular way, with a particular kind of feeling from him. Or she will interpret the outcome as confirmation of something she was already afraid was true about herself. This need is palpable. It changes the quality of everything she does. The way she laughs, the questions she asks, the things she is willing to say. It makes her, without her knowing it, slightly smaller than she is, because she is editing herself for the outcome. She is performing a version of herself that she hopes will be chosen, rather than simply being the version of herself that actually exists. A man over 65 with any self-awareness can feel this. He does not want to feel it. He is not looking for it. He is not judging her for it, but he feels it, the way you feel the pressure of weather before a storm. And it creates in him a kind of backing away, not from her specifically, from the weight of what she needs him to be, because what she needs him to be is her confirmation, her proof, the evidence she has been waiting for that she is enough. And that is a weight that a mature man does not want to carry and cannot carry without it eventually exhausting both of them. Now imagine the woman who has already chosen herself. She has decided on some ordinary Tuesday morning, or in the middle of the night when she could not sleep, or slowly over months and years, through therapy and reflection and hard experience and long walks and conversations with women she trusts. She has decided that she is enough. Not in a defiant way, not in a way that makes her closed to anyone or anything, but in the quiet, solid, unargumentative way that a person inhabits a truth they no longer need to debate. She is enough. She knows it. She does not need you to confirm it, though she will enjoy you if you are worth enjoying. This woman enters every interaction differently. She is not there to be chosen. She is there to discover whether this is a person she wants in her world. She is evaluating gently and with genuine openness whether this person is interesting, whether they are honest, whether being with them adds something or asks something she is not willing to give. She is a subject in her own story, and not an object in his. And that subjecthood, that fundamental sense of herself as the person doing the choosing as much as being chosen, changes everything about her presence. A man meeting this woman does not feel pressure. He feels invitation. He does not feel the weight of her need for his approval. He feels the warmth of her genuine interest in who he is. He does not feel that she is performing for him. He feels that she is simply being with him and trusting him to decide whether being with her is the remarkable thing it actually is. There is nothing more compelling to an emotionally mature man than a woman who does not need him, but who has decided he might be worth knowing. Think about the last time you were with someone who was completely at ease with themselves in your company, who was glad you were there, but not desperate for your approval, not monitoring your reactions, not performing anything, who was simply themselves, and who seemed to assume without arrogance that themselves was something worth being. How did you feel in their company? Probably more at ease than usual, more willing to be real yourself, more drawn to them, not less, precisely because they were not pulling at you. This is the sixth quality. This is what all 6 dimensions have been building toward. The woman who has chosen herself, who stopped disappearing, who carries her story with dignity, who is genuinely interested in others without losing herself, who is emotionally steady, who has real opinions, and who no longer waits for external choosing to feel complete. That woman creates an atmosphere that men over 65 will drive hours to be in and think about for days after they leave. And she is not a fictional ideal. She is not a goal you have to achieve. She is the woman you have been becoming, slowly, through every hard thing, every loss, every morning of starting over, every moment of choosing to stay present to your own life even when it was difficult. She is you at your most honest, at your most arrived. Here is what I want to leave with you. There is a particular moment in a woman's life, and for many women it arrives somewhere in their 60s, when something fundamental shifts. It is not a dramatic shift. It does not announce itself. It does not come with a revelation or a ceremony or a particularly significant day. It comes, usually, as a quiet settling, a morning when you wake up and you are simply there, in your body, in your life, in your truth, without the old anxious monitoring, without the background noise of, "Am I enough?" Without the particular weight of performing yourself for an audience, you no longer feel compelled to impress. This settling is not resignation. It is not giving up. It is not the peace of someone who has stopped expecting anything from life. It is something far more vital than that. It is the peace of someone who has finally fully arrived in her own life, who has stopped living in the past or leaning toward a future in which she will finally be allowed to relax into herself, who is here now as she is, and who has decided, without fanfare, without requiring the world's permission, that here and now and as she is more than sufficient. This is the woman men over 65 find completely irresistible. And I want you to understand that this is not about being attractive to men. It is about being fully alive to your own life. Men are simply one of the places where this aliveness is reflected back to you, because aliveness, genuine and unperformed, is magnetic to everyone, to men, to women, to children, to strangers in cafes, to every living thing that knows, instinctively, what it is to be in the presence of someone who is truly and completely themselves. You have been through enough to arrive here. You have paid, in the currency of loss and endurance and difficult years, for every single dimension of self-possession we have talked about today. Not one of these qualities was given to you easily. Every one of them was earned through relationships that did not work, through grief that reordered your priorities, through a slow and sometimes painful process of deciding what was actually true about you and what had simply been borrowed from other people's expectations. That earning matters. It is written in you. It is visible in the way you hold yourself, in the quality of your listening, in the particular warmth of a woman who has been through winter and knows from the inside what it takes to make it to spring. Men who have also been through winter know how to recognize that. They are not looking for summer. They are looking for someone who has survived winter and is still capable of warmth. You are that woman. You may not see yourself that way yet. You may still be carrying some version of the old belief that the most attractive version of you is a younger version of you, a less complicated version of you, a version with fewer chapters and lighter freight. But I want you to hear this as clearly as I can say it. That belief was planted in you by a world that was afraid of what you might become if you knew your actual worth. And you are allowed, you are invited, you are urged to let that belief go. The woman sitting in the golden light of that cafe at the beginning of this conversation was not attractive in spite of her age or her history or the fullness of her life. She was attractive because of it, because she had arrived, because she had nothing left to prove, because she was simply, fully, magnificently herself. And that self, at 60 and beyond, is one of the most remarkable things on earth. You are one of the most remarkable things on earth. Carry yourself accordingly. That is the truth you get to live in now. If this video added something real to your day, to your sense of yourself, to your understanding of what you actually bring into any room, then I would love for you to like it. That small gesture tells the world that this kind of conversation matters, and it helps more women exactly like you find their way here. If something in what we talked about today touched something true in you, please leave a comment. Tell me which of the 6 dimensions spoke to you most. Tell me what you are still working on or what you have already claimed. Tell me your experience of arriving in yourself. Because your voice in this community is not decoration, it is the whole point. And if you have a woman in your life who needs to hear any part of what was said today, a friend, a sister, a daughter, anyone who is in the middle of finding herself, please share this with her. You might not know how much she needs it. The person who cares enough to say here, "I thought of you," that is a gift that stays. If you are new here, welcome to the Heart Code. Subscribe and stay. This is a community of women who have decided to understand themselves more deeply, and the conversations here get richer the more voices join them. And if this work has genuinely added value to your life, if something said today sits with you in a way that matters, you can support it directly with super thanks. Every contribution makes it possible to keep making content that treats you as the intelligent, extraordinary woman you are. Thank you for being here. Thank you for choosing, in the middle of your busy life, to spend this time with yourself. That choice, the choice to invest in your own understanding, is itself an act of self-possession, and I will see you in the next one.